I really appreciate the opportunity. When Marilyn first called me, I was just a touch hesitant, just because it's like they're going to be tired of hearing from me after all these years, and they just get lost. But the more I thought about it, the more I really appreciate the opportunity to do this, because I have a really special place in my heart for the user group and the people that have been involved in it for many, many years. And it gives me a chance to say goodbye. Or not goodbye, but keep in touch, but not quite as often as we used to do. Because I'll always be your friend, and I have no problem giving out my email, and I hope I do hear from you on occasion. And I know how it is. That's the whole thing that I've learned. So Marilyn asked me if I could talk about some of the highlights and lowlights and what I've learned in IT for the past 10 years. So I was thinking of what Gary would like, and I put together some funny cartoons, but maybe I might hold them up, or we'll just post them on the website, kind of thing. Why IBM? Why did I retire now? It just felt right. That's all I can say. My parents are in their 90s, and they need a lot more help. And that was kind of the primary motivation. I thought, I can't let this Christmas season go by. So I picked Halloween. I thought it would be a great day to retire. Wear a mask, dress in black, that kind of a thing. It's interesting when you retire from IBM, a manager meets you in our mobile office and you just hand everything over, and that's about it. They give you a nice purse as you leave, or a food processor or whatever. But, it's not those are the important things, as we all know. It's the people and the relationships that you have over the years. That's what's really important. And the other thing is, there are some things I've always wanted to do in my life, one of which is the art side. I was actually an art major. I was an experiment within IBM. They were looking to hire people who could communicate technical things well. They said, we will train you on everything you need to know, but we need people who can communicate. That's what we're looking for. So I actually found my manager out in Riverton, the manager who hired me about a year ago. I was standing out there in the LDS Church Riverton office. We were making a call out there, and here's this manager who hired me 32 plus years ago, standing there, who I thought had lived in Idaho. And we talked, and he says, yeah, yours was an experiment, but it was a great experiment, and it turned out very well. So there were several people we hired about that time frame that all turned out very well for IBM. So it's kind of interesting. So it goes to prove you can be an arts and humanities major and still have a career. So the thing about IBM, though, is they put you through a very rigorous, it was 1 year total heads down education. And they say it's equivalent to an MBA by the time you get out of boot camp. And that was really hard. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. It was really hard the first day in class, and everybody's getting up to tell what their major is. Hi, I'm from MIT, I'm from Stanford. Hi, I'm Robin Van Wagenen. I graduated in arts and humanities from BYU. You can hear the snicker. But I think my manager felt okay when I came back, and the first class I was either number 1 or 2, and the second class I was number 1 or 2 in the class. So he felt like he'd made took a reasonable risk on me, for which I'm very grateful, because the first week in IBM I met my husband too at IBM. So it was a double good thing for me, even though I had no plans on going into IT. Just a fluky thing and meeting the right people, and that's the way things happen sometimes. You're just at crossroads in your life, and things happen, and it's amazing how things sometimes work out. So when you talk about struggles, my first job at IBM was, you all know Mark Miller from his commercials, but IBM used to sell a lot of application packages. I don't know if you remember that. And the two I was assigned to construction and auto dealers. And so Mark Miller had written a package in RPG, and I was assigned to, it's like you just get back from class, you took 3 weeks of RPG in Atlanta, you come back and they say, now you get to support all the customers worldwide who have bought this package. And that was a baptism by fire, I'll tell you. And Mark Miller was a very patient man. Because I didn't know, you're reading somebody else's code you didn't write, trying to support it the best you can, and that was tough. But I'm sure that was part of the plan, to throw you into the bath water and see how well you sunk or swam. So I got pretty good. I spent a lot more time, actually, because I think we sold more packages on the construction side. But the one thing I learned on the construction side was, number one, I know what they tell you in the IBM classes to dress for success. They used to have this, the very end of your training, this dress for success class on how you dress for business. You don't wear those high heels at a construction site. It does not work. And you know what? I don't care what else is going on. If a construction company calls and it's payroll day and that system's got problems, you better get over there right now. That was the top priority, because those construction workers who do not get their paychecks are mean guys. So we used to sell several packages. We had a distribution package called DMAS. We had a manufacturing package called Maypix. I think we even had a hospital package at one point in time. And IBM made the decision to get out of the application software business. We didn't want to compete with our partners who were in those markets. So we said, we will enable the middleware, the infrastructure, the foundation of packages, but we will not compete directly against our partners. So there was a major shift there. So that's when you saw a lot of the, WebSphere, Rational, these kinds of things start being developed, so people could build their applications on top of top-notch infrastructures. So that's kind of where the focus was. So it's been interesting to see how that's changed, both from the application side. The other big shift that I have seen, that some of you may or may not be aware of, is that our switch over to partners. We have very few direct IBM people anymore. It's all being done through partners. And some people don't understand that it's key you pick a good partner who's with you for the long haul, because they will be your primary focus and IBM is your secondary. So sometimes people think they're going to shop partners or look around, or and I've seen it time and time again. And I can say that now that I don't work for IBM anymore. But the best option is find a good partner who gives you a good deal and stick with that partner. And because typically IBM will reward them for making the long investment with you. So one tip on partners is find a good one. And don't change every 6 months. It's not a good thing, and partners don't want to invest in you if you do that. It's just, that's the way it is. Let's see, other challenges. Oh, so I did start out as a systems engineer for 13 years. I absolutely loved being an SE. That was my all-time favorite job in IBM. But then when they said, well, we're moving more towards services market, so they had us do services for a year or two. As the market changed, things went more commodity. Yeah, and that was okay. And then they said, no, we're switching you over to marketing. I was like, but I don't want to go over to marketing. I like the technical side. And it's one of those things like, well, you're good at marketing too. So we need people in marketing more than we need people technical at the time. And so I made the switch, but my intent was always to go back to the technical side. But they would never let me do that because I did too well on the marketing side. So that's one of the frustrations I had, was sometimes you can't follow your dream even. And I've talked to other people within IBM, and they said, if you really want to do things like that, you have to leave IBM and then come back a different way. So that's one of my regrets, was that I didn't get to do what I really love to do. But I always tried on the marketing side to kind of make it a mix and try to get in those areas where I could have more of a technical background. And one of the examples of that was when I was doing, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, they needed somebody to do new workloads, and most people yawned and said, I don't want to do that. And it was voice over IP and DB2 web query, which was so fun to do. And I learned so much when I did that job, and traveled all over the West, although it does go with one of my greatest fiascos too. What I learned is IBM had a national contract with Sprint. And so I would do live demos, for instance, of like DB2 web query, and Sprint just does not work in Montana. So one of my rules you'll see later is always have a backup, and boy, I never could do a live demo in Montana because of the Sprint network being non-existent. The other thing on that particular job is I was doing voice over IP, flew up to Anchorage, and it had been a brutal way up. I didn't know that when I wasn't careful enough when I booked my flights, and I didn't know there were milk runs out of Seattle up to Juneau. So I booked the last flight out so I could get Salt Lake up to Seattle, book it out. And this was in, I think it was late November, because the Christmas lights were all up in Anchorage. I remember that. But what happened was, I apparently ended up on an Alaska milk run flight through Ketchikan. And I love Ketchikan in the daytime, but the problem is the Juneau airport is built right on the ocean and it fogs in all the time, which I didn't know. We're coming in late at night, it's probably 11:30 into Ketchikan, and they're going, we have a problem because Juneau's fogged in. We can't, and so it's like, well, that's okay, I'll just, if you have to, worst case, go sleep in the airport. And it was like, no, you don't understand. The airport is closed, and it's on an island. So I was like, what are we going to do? You can't stay in the airport. You're on this island in the middle of the night. I don't know anybody on the plane, and they were going, well, stay on the plane. We stayed on the plane for another couple of hours, and finally the pilot said, we're going to make one more run at it. So all of a sudden there's this announcement, get back on the plane really quick. We have 10 minutes to take off. And we got out of there and barely got into Juneau as the fog made a little lift or something, and got in about 2 in the morning. And then I get up to do my demo the next day. I was doing a presentation on voice over IP, which, as you know, is dependent on a very strong network infrastructure. I mean, you have to have some good networking. You have to have some priority networking on your network and some things like that. So I'm launching into this presentation, and people are raising their hand going, and how do we do that over satellite? How many of you are in locations that are only served by satellite? At least half the hands went up, and it's just like, so, I should have done my homework. Voice over IP over satellite is not a great option. So I learned a lot there, and they said, well, thank you for the information. And I think I launched right then into a demo on DB2 web query, which I could do because Sprint did work in Alaska. But we kind of left the voice over IP side. So sometimes you need to know your audience, and I apparently didn't know that audience very well. Great people, though, and everywhere there are great people. In the late 1980s, I'm not sure if you're all aware, but IBM really went through some bad times. I mean, to the point of, teetering on bankruptcy. And I don't think till years later anybody, even we as IBM employees, knew that. I mean, they were to the point, I remember writing a letter to my manager, what do you mean we can't get a Franklin Covey day planner, They said, no, you have to print it off the printer if you want a calendar. We can't do this. And I didn't realize at the time how serious the finances were. But the world was changing, and IBM had recognized the changes but hadn't moved quick enough. I think we had a good president. I think he took a lot of the heat for it, but that's when they made the change and changed to Lou Gerstner, who did a lot of good things and truly did save the company. And one of the things I'm most grateful to Lou Gerstner for, he has his positives and his negatives, but he kept IBM together, because everybody on Wall Street said, break it apart. Make separate businesses. They can be more profitable separately than they can together. And Lou was absolutely right when he said the strength of IBM is to have all these resources together. This is a great company. We do not want to break it up. And as you know, he started to get into the services and all these other things that diversified IBM and made it a great company that it is today. It truly is. If you saw on the news a week ago, IBM stock was the second best performing stock in the stock market last year. It's just barely, McDonald's just nudged us out, but I think that's a statement to we're on a really good financial future. If you're not aware of the news lately, we got a new CEO the end of the year. It was Sam Palmisano. Sam Palmisano was an interesting man. I met him once as I was sitting in Rochester, waiting for a group of people, and all the people that were supposed to meet me, they were all late, and I was the only one on time. And Sam Palmisano comes walking through the front doors of the Rochester lab, and I happened to be sitting there. And he smiled and said hello and walked on with his entourage, and very nice. And then the teammates I was supposed to be meeting with came in about 5 minutes later. I said, well, you just missed him. He just walked through. And they were kind of disappointed, but I think Sam has been very much a numbers guy, placating the investors, but made a lot of necessary changes. Some we don't always agree with when we're in the trenches, but I think he's done a very good job for IBM. The person who's taking over is a lady named Ginny Rometty. And Ginny Rometty ran the services business for IBM for many years. I really like Ginny Rometty, and I think it's a good change. and I think the time is right to make a change. And I think she'll do some really good things for IBM in the future. So they had it down to 2 people. I'm like, oh, please pick Ginny. You know, because I still own a lot of IBM stock. So that IBM is giving bonuses in 2015 to all employees who make a certain stock number. So I won't be around to collect on that, but I will as a stockholder, obviously, if the stock performs well. So I think the future is also bright for IBM. So one of the things I was just going to mention, I do lament, one of the things that's changed over the years is there's a lot fewer women in IT, and I don't know why. I don't know if guys come up from the networking side, and that's kind of what happens, but when I started at IBM, about 40% were women. And you look around today, hi Marilyn. So, you know, one thing I would say is encourage your daughters to look at this as a profession. It's a great profession. I've known terrific women as programmers and system analysts and managers and things like that. And it's just, you know, if you're going to get a career, this is a great career to go into, even for your daughters. So I have to laugh, though, because my son, I didn't want to, this is my youngest son, and one day he said, maybe I want to do IT, and he kept borrowing all my programming books, and I'm like, oh, you know, you sure you want to do this? I didn't want to, you know what I mean? You don't want to say, hey, you know, come work for IBM or anything like that. And then he started dating this gal. I think you'd be a great pediatrician. So he goes, okay, I want to go to medical school. Then he comes back and they broke up. And he meets this other gal, and she goes, John, what do you really want to do? I really want to do IT. So that's going to be his career despite me. So, but encourage your daughters to do the same. If I had daughters, I would have encouraged them to look at this as a career. So anyway, so I don't know why that is. I haven't figured out why there are a lot fewer women. But so my worst day at IBM was when we had the major purge and they laid off a ton of people. As I mentioned, I used to be a team lead for 13 SEs. And that day, we lost a good part of all those people when they walked out the door. The guy sat across, I don't know if any of you remember a guy named Benton Hildebrand, but he literally went into the manager's office, walked out the door, never even went back to his desk and got his things. So that was a really black day for IBM. But sometimes when you go through the worst things, good things arise. My hardest customer call, I had to throw this in, was, and I love the people at the city of Orem, but they had just built the irony is they just built a new public safety building. And they were going to take me on a tour of the building, which was great. So we get up there, it's on the 2nd floor, we're going around a corner, and we're going into their computer room. And just as it registered in my mind that he had said, oh, by the way, watch it because all the flooring is out, it registered in my mind as I was falling through the computer floor and hit my head on a file cabinet. And so I have blood streaming down my face and all this kind of stuff. And it's just so ironic it was in their public safety building. And I said, just take me to an emergency room. I'll get some stitches, you know. I knew because it was a head wound, it bled a lot, but it probably wasn't too serious. So, no, we can't do that because of liability. We have to take you in the ambulance. And I'm like, oh gosh, you know, the last thing you want to do is be hauled out in an ambulance. So I said, no. And one of our ambulances just pulled into the bottom of the building. We'll put you in Taos, which hospital you want to go to. So I said, okay, take me down to Utah Valley. But the funny thing was, they hadn't made the elevators big enough for a gurney. So they're chipping this up. I mean, it was just comedy of errors. So anyway, that was probably my worst customer call in terms of what happened to me. And it was interesting, I got, later on, my husband said, I had this strong feeling that I would need to be prepared to go down and get you that day. And I said, well, why didn't you tell me that not to go in the first place? He says, I don't know, I just had this feeling. So anyway, it's amazing how things happen for reasons. The other thing that has been really hard for me, gambling and golf. As you know, I cover Las Vegas, and that's been, there are great people in Las Vegas. There are great people everywhere. A lot of things I love about Las Vegas. I know some of you have lived in Las Vegas. So, but it's also been hard the other side, particularly when I said, we really have to have you play in this poker tournament. we're asking our IBM sponsors or whatever to play in the poker tournament. It's just like, so there's two things I've always asked my managers to do. I'm sorry, but you have to play in any gambling things. And I don't golf. I don't like golf. I like driving the cart. I don't like to golf. I'm too impatient. So I get managers to do my gambling and my golf for me. But it works. So anyway, and that's been on the bad times. It's been interesting to see the change in the world. So I started in the world of batch jobs, RPG, COBOL, systems engineering. Now we're in a 24/7 virtual cloud world running apps from an app store. Some of the highlights have been, that I have learned from, is we had to do a really grody competitive conversion once. And Keith was on this team, another guy from India, Deek Diaz and others. But I learned so much from that experience. And we got it done, and it was a great project. But that was, and I just learned what great people are around that can really help you when you need it. Another one I really loved working on was we did a big benchmark for American Express. And this was one of those things where they said, we're not even going to consider AS400s, it's old technology, you know, we hear it all the time. And it's like, okay, well, I said, well, our credit card processing is taking 24 hours to get it done, and we can't have that done. So he said, let's take it, let's benchmark it in Rochester, so let's see what we could take your application, run it back there, see what it could be done. But they were going to do this with every other competitor. By the time we were done, we were the only ones left standing. We had increased the performance 6 times what they were currently getting. The AS400 just blew the socks off of their Windows servers. At the time, I think it was NT servers. So that was a really sweet win. And then from that point on, American Express, that group of American Express invested heavily in the product. So the proof is in the pudding. Same thing happened with a customer in Las Vegas. Similar type of deal. They tried it and they moved it all back. So one of the other highlights, I even brought a picture, but I didn't want to. I did a little PowerPoint presentation just so you know I was a true IBMer. Well, that was the first day I started IBM. I was a lot younger then. But the Olympics, I thought I'm going to be sued if you put this on the website, and I use Olympic rings. But these were the rings that I took for my cell phone when we had the Olympics here. So I did work with the team that was on the Olympics. So that's a highlight and a disappointment. We thought IBM was going to get the technology bid for the Olympics. In fact, a teammate and I had gone down to Atlanta and went through all the technology stuff because we were going to be the team leads for the Olympic project here locally. And then that was the year they decided to split IT technology from internet technology. And IBM said, if we don't have the internet, we don't want to be a sponsor of the Olympics. And the first one they weren't a sponsor was Salt Lake. So it was disappointing, but the good thing to know is in the back, because they bought this before IBM announced that decision, they ran all their accounting and all that kind of stuff. They had a little AS400 that was running assist software, doing a lot of the behind the scenes behind the Olympics. So we can still say we did a lot at the Olympics, and that they were a great team to work with. So, but we had to be careful at that point since we weren't the sponsor. There were perks working for IBM. One of them, I think, it was actually a Las Vegas perk. I remember they said, okay, we need somebody to go. I said, okay, what do you need? We need you in Las Vegas. What do you need me in Las Vegas for? Well, IBM is a sponsor of this event. We paid a ton of money for this foundation for whatever. I can't even remember who it was for. Well, so you have to go to this charity event. Okay, well, who are the performers? Well, there's 3 of them. There's Jerry Seinfeld, Celine Dion, and Elton John. Oh, I think I can manage that one. I'm your person. So anyway, there were a few things like that you got to do. The travel was fun. Sometimes it was a grind, but you guys know how that goes. So I put my top 10 lessons learned in IT. And so this is my personal kind of rules that I like to live by. Number 1 is decide who you work for. I know that sounds corny because we all have managers and we all work for somebody. But at some point I had to make a decision who I worked for. Did I work for the IBM Manager of the Week, or did I work for the customers that are here locally? And I used to make the choice of the customers, unless I was threatened with being fired. Because I knew that I would see them day in and day out, and they would be my friends for the long term. And the manager would change next year. And so I always tried to do the right thing by IBM, but first and foremost, I wanted to do the right thing for a customer. So did it always happen? There were probably areas where I messed up, but that's what I really tried to do, and what I tried to remember was who do I work for? And you guys probably have the same situation today. You have customers, you have banking customers, whatever it might be, right? You have different people who you work for, and you kind of have to decide where you spend your time. It got a little ridiculous towards the end because we're changing managers now every 6 months. I think I had a 6 months change the last 2 or 3 years, every 6 months, a new manager. And it's like, come on, guys. So I have to be truthful when I say that's one of the reasons I left IBM. That's just really hard to deal with. My second top 10 lesson learned is be nice to everyone, not just to get in the door or get where you want. I have dear friends all over the place, high in the company, low in the company. It didn't matter. They're my friends. And I can't stand it when I would see people, and I have fellow IBMers, they'd only be nice when there's something they wanted, and then, then they don't even see you when they've got what they want and they've moved on. And we all know people like that. That has always driven me up a wall. But you never know when you see these people in another life, when they've gone to another company. I have some of my dearest friends are Catholic friends I've met through IBM because they have a high degree of integrity and wonderful people. Whether they're Catholics, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, I don't care if they're great people. And sometimes you can give people a hand when they're down, and at some point in time, hopefully they'll give you a hand. I've also learned that the farther away you get from the coast, people get more laid back. So I'm sorry there's a group even more laid back than you guys, and that's in Montana. But wonderful people everywhere, and I learned to like them all. My number 3, don't be a whiner even when there's a lot to whine about. I learned this actually from my parenting more than IBM, I think, but it carried over into my IBM world. I had a sister, why do you let your boys do some of those things? And they weren't doing bad things. It's just, sometimes boys can be a little rambunctious, and I probably gave them a little more leeway than she would have given them. But I said, no, I save my battles for the really important things. On these things that really matter, I don't budge an inch. And I think the same thing is in IT. When I left IBM, when I decided to leave, I decided about a year ago that this probably would be the year that I would look. A lot of things would get under my nerves. I would just put them on a spreadsheet. These are the things. So, and then I'd look at it every once in a while. So to remind myself, okay, I'm leaving or I'm staying. These are the things I like. These are the things that are frustrating me. Just to kind of keep things in perspective. But the interesting thing is once I got it on the spreadsheet, I didn't stew about it anymore. It was there. I could deal with it if I wanted to, but I wasn't going to harp about it. And nobody likes somebody who's always whining and complaining about everything. So sometimes it's nice to hear, hey, you've done a good job, or gee, I really appreciate the way IBM does something or other. So I think that's just one of life's lessons. So pick your battles. And if it is a battle worth fighting, by all means fight it. I fought my share of battles too, but if it's not, let it ride. Otherwise, they don't listen to you when you have the big fight that you really need to make a difference. So I think when people say, why did you survive when a lot of people have come and gone, I was the first person who'd retired from IBM in 7 years without being asked to retire. So that says, why did you survive? And I think it's because of basically a positive attitude and trying to be flexible. And I think that's a real lesson to be learned. Which is my next point, be flexible and laugh a lot. Some things are so ridiculous, it's all you can do. I had a rep I worked with in Las Vegas in a lot of the casino accounts, and she said, I always know when it's going to be something really good or really bad because, Robin, you start laughing. So I can either tell it's going to be something really good or really bad, but you either laugh or you cry, but you just have to deal with it, right? So you might as well try to be positive about it. My funniest phone call, this was in my very early days. My husband was a marketing rep in Provo and I was a systems engineer. We were just starting to date, probably the way to say it. And we were sitting in this office at Geneva Rock and this big spider starts coming down from the ceiling. I can take snakes, I can take toads, I can take all of the spiders. I hate spiders. This thing starts coming down right for the top of his head. But I couldn't tell him. I just started just hysterically, and he's talking away like he knows everything, and there's this big honking spider coming down, and it was the funniest call. So finally I said, on your head, and he pulls the spider off, and all is well. And then I had met this guy, a friend of somebody I had worked with in a previous job, at a mission reunion, who was from Rio de Janeiro. And somehow, so this is the same call. We're in the back talking with the customer, and all of a sudden I get this phone call, and it's from Rio. and the guy I was with, who ended up to my husband, Bob, goes, what earth is going on? This guy had tracked me down somehow through when we had an IBM operator, and found me at the customer location and called me to ask if I would go visit him in Rio de Janeiro. And I just thought, that is just bizarre. But I know Latin Americans are hot-blooded, but but the good thing is it probably moved our dating along quite a bit. This other guy was calling when I was with Bob, asking me to go to Rio, which of course I did not do. So anyway, you just have to laugh at some of these things. Another key thing is, the reason I'm a survivor is because it's always learned some new skill. I've always had a great love of learning and trying something new. When I was asked to do the voice over IP and DB2 web query stuff, I'm like, man, voice over IP, not an area I have ever done before. But I tackled it, and at the end I got pretty comfortable with it. And I'm really glad I had that experience, because I laid low, they reorged the next year, and I was back in the position another position that I really wanted to be in. So many good jobs around. You just kind of have to keep your eyes open and be flexible. So, and then what the great thing about IBM was we could do a lot of classes online and do education and things like that. So I know you have to look a little harder to find some of those opportunities, and they can be costly, but it's amazing how many free ones you can come up with. I'm taking art classes starting Saturday. So I'm not that bad at art, but I've never actually taken lessons. In fact, I've won 6 blue ribbons at the county fairs the last 3 years for some of the stuff I've done, and it's just a passion of mine that now I get to pursue a little bit more. So, but look at your resources, see if you can find free places to get skills too. Number 6, have an escape valve. You always have to, in this industry, is very high pressure. That's one of the things that I don't think some people understand about IT. And so it's important you find a confidant that you can unload on. I know I always had somebody that I could just dump everything on, not hold it in, then be done with it and move on. Not to be a whiner, but somebody just on occasion say, can I just listen and dump on you? And then I can put it aside and go on. I also had a manager who gave me good advice. This is Bill Bennett, who ended up as the manager CEO at Franklin Covey, and he said, if things bother you, write them down in a note, but don't send them. Just save them in the drafts folder, let them stew for a week. If you still feel strongly enough, then send it. But, let it age a little bit. And that probably saved me from being fired a long time ago. Things wouldn't have happened that way. And part of this is, remember that you always work for your family, not in spite of them. I remember years ago we had he was head of the services division. All the CEs reported to him around the world. We used to have things called family dinners, and you'd meet together as IBMers with your families. I don't do this anymore, but about once every 5 years you'd have a nice dinner, and they'd bring an IBM executive to come and talk. This guy I've never forgotten. He came in and he said, I just walked my daughter down the aisle. He said, I didn't even know who she was. I had spent so much time at IBM. And, and a CE manager, that's a tough gig. And he was a manager of all the CEs. He says, I didn't know who she was. And his message was basically, don't make the same mistake. So it goes without saying. After that, I tried to keep things in perspective. I was always there for emergencies, but they better be an emergency. I didn't try to make emergencies a way of life to cut into my family time. And I couldn't get a hobby for mine is painting. The next one, always have a backup. We talked about the live demos. That's why I always have backups. I have backup charts. Because I was amazed how many IBMers, well, I can't get that to you because my laptop crashed. Well, did you back it up? No. Because I know ThinkPads are great technology, but come on, So anyway, it's amazing. So you need backups for everything, and back up that darn laptop. So I don't know. IBM is reorganizing right now, as we talked about. So in terms of backup, I know Maureen Sherlock has been covering for me till they figure out what's going on. And I think her email, you might want to write this down if you ever need anything, is masherl@us.ibm.com. And my manager's name is ex-manager, dlong1@us.ibm.com. So that, in terms of giving you a backup till they find out what they're doing, after I leave, those are a couple of resources you can use. If you didn't get those, come up afterward and I'll tell you. Number 8 was know your resources. I think sometimes we get frustrated. We think we're in it all alone, but we have a lot more resources than we think we have. And one of the great resources is the user group. You guys have each other, and you can bounce things off of each other, and it's a community. And that's a wonderful thing. I learned in IBM, in fact, I have my corny picture here, but that there were a whole bunch of resources that I never knew existed. It's amazing. And hardly any customers ever use these resources. Did you know we have media groups that specialize just in media? We have banking and finance groups that consult with all, and then will come and consult with you for free that do banking. And they work with Wall Street and how to do secure transactions. And that was one of my last things, was try to get them hooked up with your group. And I told Johnny still needs to push on that because they're a really good group. But there are a ton of resources, and sometimes customers just don't ask for them, or we don't think to tell them about all the resources that they have available that they could use, many of which are no-charge resources. So it helps to sit down once in a while with your IBM rep and just say, hey, this is what I want to do. What resources do you have in IBM to help me? I mean, some of them may be chargeable, but a lot are not chargeable. And they're just sitting there waiting to do pre-sales kind of things, and nobody asks them. So I would really strongly urge you to look around on those types of things. Okay, number 9. Please don't take this wrong, but to me, integrity is everything. I think when times get tough, and it's been interesting because in the last couple of years I've seen some really interesting behaviors, where those that have integrity don't change their behaviors, and some that don't have integrity are doing some really squirrely things I've never seen before. And they can be customers, they can be partners, it's just interesting to see. So I think you always need to be true to yourself. I remember in my early days, I had a mentor that was supposed to help me get started, and then one day she tried to get me fired. And she went into my manager's manager and said, "You're hiring too many," and then she used a few words, blankety blank Mormons. And then she gave him a laundry list of all the things that she felt I had not performed well on. Well, I was I'd been with the company a year, and I was just learning. And when you're an art major, art and humanities, it's a little bit of a stretch sometimes. But I decided, and I really stewed over what to do with her, because I could tell she was going to make my life miserable for the rest of my career, because she had a lot of influence. And finally I looked and I just said, you know what? I have to do what it says in the, excuse a scriptural reference, but in the Bible, there's a reference about take me in thee alone. And I took her off, and we had a real heart-to-heart, and I said, you know what? I am trying my best. You don't like me, but we have to make this work. So this is what I commit to do. What do you commit to do? She became a wonderful friend after that, and was very good to me and helped me immensely. And I was really grateful I didn't just go back into my manager and start screaming and this person's trying to get me, and that we could go back in and talk, because she was a great asset to me. And the other thing I love about IBM is IBM was always supportive of me doing the right thing. Because sometimes I had to make the bad call. And sometimes customers ask for things that are absolutely unreasonable or not right. Or they're trying to save a dime and they do some really, or an IBMer does a really bad thing and you end up calling them on the carpet. But, and we have, I'm sure you're aware of it. I laughed about not taking gifts, but we have a very strict business conduct guideline policy of the way we do business and the things we're supposed to do. I was always grateful for that, because that was a compass for me. So I wasn't always the bad guy because I wanted to do the right thing, but I could say, you know what? Our business conduct guidelines prevent me from doing that. Having that made my job a whole lot easier. But there are some people who don't like me because of that. So, And I've also learned not everybody will like you, right? You hope that 90% of people do, but sometimes they're not going to like you because of those things. I only met one IBMer in my whole career that I could say absolutely went against those things. And he didn't last very long because I am convinced that those things always catch up with you. So we had a values jam a few years ago where all the employees said, what are the values we want going forward? They dropped one I really liked, but they did put one there that was a new one I really do like, and it was trust and personal responsibility in our relationships. And I think it's such an enjoyable work environment when you trust people. I always appreciated people who said, you know what, you're not the lowest cost vendor. I'm not sure I can give you a shot at this, but let me tell you, and they were upfront with me. I would much rather them do that than do something behind my back and say, oh no, make up some reason why they didn't go with our solution or something like that. So I had a manager once that said the next best answer to a yes is a no. And so I really appreciated people who were honest and upfront, and I could trust them. And they said, we'll give you a shot next time or whatever. And it's like, great, I'm okay with that. I have no problem. Just tell me like it is so I can trust you. We talked about, yeah. And the last thing, this is number 10, you'll be glad. It's all about the people. So I was looking for my picture. You'll love this. People come and go. They move from companies. We know how that goes. But what's great about, what I always loved about IBM was the people that I worked with. They were great. And the customers. Do you remember this one? This was my favorite user group. Gary's here, and it's Frank Soltis. When we had the thing at the library.
Oh, I looked at those pictures yesterday.
Did you?
Well, I should print that one for you and frame it, and then I didn't.
Well,
I already have it.
I found it. But I'm going, you're just wonderful people, and it's the people, the customers, those are the things that I remember. I want to remember the companies you worked for 10 years from now. But I remember your face. I'll see you at a store, whatever. I had to laugh because one day I was going through Costco, and a good friend of mine is George Odenkrantz, who's the CIO at Sinclair. But he was dressed in Levi's and stuff like that. He almost had to go, Robin, you see people out of the context that you normally see him in the suit. And, so if you see me that way, just run your shopping cart into me and say, Robin, I know I dress this way or whatever, but I hope that we keep up the relationships because that's why we do it. It's all about the people. And those are the things I will remember the most. And with that, it's been a great run, and I will keep on the user group site and hopefully keep in contact and keep touch over the years. So appreciate it. Thanks.